What's
Hello.
up,
There you are.
people? Hey. Florence, welcome back.
Thank you.
I am so excited. Joan, Sasa,
Pretty
how are you?
tired.
Tired?
Yes.
Okay, we'll make it slow and easy. We'll make it fast and easy for you. Barbara, where do I start? Thank you so much for
well,
willing to do this.
Yeah.
the pleasure is really mine. So, it's always a pleasure doing. I'm very passionate about immigration and helping people out, and so it's a topic that's close to my heart. So I'm super excited to do this, and thank you for having me.
Of course. And yeah, appreciate you joining. Hey, Sessa, welcome.
Hey, Sessa.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Good
Hey.
evening.
I'll transfer to my laptop in a minute when I can find the link for this.
Whatever.
Everyone's doing well.
These people who hate Google Meet. Barbara, are you okay with Google Meet, by the way?
Yes, I am. But can you all hear me? Because I kind of messed up my earphones, so
We can.
I'm hoping everybody can hear me clearly.
Yeah, good. We hear
Yeah, we
you.
can hear you. We can hear you.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Okay, today will be one of those days where, Joanna, I'm going to look at you. You say, you do this. Panyevi. Hurry up like that. Today, I'm not going to waste any time. I think we're expecting quite a number of people because this topic is extremely contemporary and there's a lot going on. So,
Oh, I'm loving that people are actually joining. I was kind of concerned that people wouldn't join for some reason.
you know how many things are going around about passport 1 or 2? I don't know. Kids are going from 20 to 6 in a classroom, so I think people are this is very timely that this topic is taking place. So I think we'll be okay. We'll give it literally 30 seconds. Today, I'm going to be true American. I'm going to stick to the timeline. Joanne, Florence, you guys move me along. And then anyway, everything's being recorded. So we're good for those who joined late.
Okay.
Hey, Edu, I see you. Mr. Otieno over there. Rita, welcome. Helen, welcome. Rose, welcome. Do you have any good jokes to crack,
No.
Florence or Joanne? No?
Don't ask me. I don't have any jokes.
I am also not in that. That's not my forte.
Oh, that's
I love jokes. I just don't know any good jokes.
Those actually, why is 6 scared of 7? You've never had that one? Why is 6 scared of 7? Consa Florence, you must know this one. Yeah, the teenage whisperer. Why is 6 scared of 7?
Because 8, 9.
7, 8.
Because 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
Because 7, 8, 9.
Something like that.
I wouldn't even know something like that.
You Kenyans, you don't find these things funny, yeah? All right.
So let me tell you a quick short story about jokes for me. And this is the Kenyan in me growing up in the environment we grew up in. We loved banter, but a lot of that banter was also cruel. And if you're a sensitive child, that stuff is not funny. So I don't like comedy for that reason, because of the sensitivity. Like, I found it cruel and mean, especially when somebody's feelings were hurt about a joke and they cried, and I was like, this is not funny. So I've never recovered from that, and I'm just do not like things that, especially that attack other people. So that's my spiel.
I think you need to go see an inner child specialist. That's
I will do that. I will do that.
All right. It's 8:03. We have a number of people who have joined. I see 12 by my count, so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ichi, and I lead this Wezesha forum, which we do on Facebook several times a year. And today's session is on immigration and its impact on our community. And I want to say a couple of things before I introduce the panelists. there's been a lot of conversations going on about immigration, especially since the new administration. And then secondly, as Kenyans, a lot of us have information, a lot of information that we could share, but I think sometimes it's hard to share if you're not sharing it amongst people who are close to you. And oftentimes it's led without facts, it's hearsay, you know, so-and-so did this, I had this happened. And so what we're trying to do with these two sessions, one is to provide information, and I'll put a disclaimer about the information we're going to provide. And then secondly, one of the things that prompted this, thank you, Florence and Joanne, was to also see what's the impact on our community and more importantly, our kids as well. Because as Kenyans or Kenyan adults, we may assume that the impact of this immigration is just on us, but we have kids friends who are in schools and they're seeing some of these things happen. So we'll explore that topic as well. So we want to talk about facts about immigration, do some myth busting about the executive orders. We'll talk a little bit about the kids' anxieties and some of the things they go through. We'll give our KenyaRican's perspective, and KenyaRican's is defined as kids born or raised in the United States of Kenyan parents, because their mentality, their thought process may be a little bit different from us. And then we'll also give advice, well, not advice, we'll talk about how parents should respond. How do you respond when your kid talks about someone from a different nationality in a certain way? And maybe you have some facts about your immigration status that you have not shared with your child. Is this a good time to share that information? So you have to be patient as I read through this. Wezesha, myself, the panelists here, we're not legal organization and do not provide any kind of legal advice. The information provided is for general information and educational purposes. It's not intended to constitute legal advice or to substitute for obtaining legal advice from a licensed attorney. There are no warranties, there's no representations. Wezesha, the panelists do not assume any responsibility for actions you decide to take or non-actions that you decide to take based on this information. You should consult with a licensed attorney about your particular circumstances before making any legal decision. The other thing that I want to point out is some people, as we talk through these discussions, may want to talk about their specific situation. I'm not a legal advisor, but this is what I think you should do. Please use hypothetical situation. Instead of saying, I am Bila Papers, you can say, Adam is Bila Papers and he wants to find out what to do. I think if you want to talk about yourself as parents, you can use Adam and Eve. You can use your children as Jack and Jill, whatever it is. That is my suggestion to you, because there's no information here that's going to be privileged. This is being recorded. It will be posted on Facebook Live to help people. So as you come in, please know that this is being recorded. Please know there's no privileged information. So I suggest if you want to talk about a specific situation, you frame it as hypothetical. So having said that, I'm going to roll it out to introduce our panelists. How about I start from right to left with Florence? Florence, tell us who you are and why this topic is of interest to you.
Thank you so much, Gichuhi. Thank you, Joanne and Barbara. I am humbled to be among the panelists here. My name is Florence Gichuhi, and I help parents and teenagers move from overwhelm, frustration, and power struggle, and create a connected and healthy relationship. Why this topic is important to me is because in my work, I have seen how teenagers and parents have continued to be disconnected now more than any other time because of this topic of immigration. And that's why this is important to me.
Thank you, Florence. Joanne?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joan Mwangi. I am a master life coach, which means I double in several things, but the one that I'm most passionate about is inner child reparenting, which is specifically about childhood trauma the things that happened to you, the things that did not happen to you, and how they are showing up in your adulthood. This topic is important to me because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation traveling around. And as an immigrant, as a mother of an adult child who has been in the military here, is Kenyan, but not Kenyan, I think we need to bust some myths and function from a place of truth and fact. I like to, when I'm coaching, I operate from truth and fact. I challenge everybody who is in my space to operate from truth and fact. And so that's why this topic is important for me. And I think also from a knowledge perspective, when you're armed with knowledge, you cannot be caught off guard. Your children will not be caught off guard. All of us will not be caught off guard. So thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Barbara Kihumba, and I am a senior counsel of Constanji Brooks Smith and Prophet here in Atlanta. I specialize in business immigration, but I used to double many years ago in family and deportation defense. I no longer do that work. I now focus mostly on business immigration. I myself, of course, I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Kenya. I was born and raised there and moved to the United States when I was 14 years old. And naturally, as an immigrant, I went through the process of immigration, and it created a very profound, had a profound impact on me. And because of that, I started off my practice as a litigator and progressively moved into immigration simply because I'm very passionate about the subject of immigration. I know how it impacts lives. I have experienced that uncertainty. And I love what I do. I make a difference in people's lives. My work is meaningful in that sense. And so, when I was invited on this panel, of course, it was my joy and my pleasure to join the panel and share my life experience as well as my professional experience. And to just second what Ichi said, this is not legal advice. And I'd caution anybody about talking about the specific situation. So you can say, for example, what if a person I give a hypothetical of what if a person has been here illegally for X amount of time, for purposes of a confidentiality, I would advise against, sharing the particulars of one's immigration status or anything of that sort. You need to keep that information confidential. But I'm happy to be here today and looking forward to the session.
Awesome. So in true American fashion, I'm going to get started. Okay. So you used some words, Barbara, you talked about, immigration, immigrant, and, words like that. I think one of the things that continues to, I like seeking clarity on this are terms or words that people use, because you'll hear someone say legal, illegal, undocumented, work authorized, H-1B, all these different things. So what I want to spend the next 10 or so minutes is you giving us operational definition of all these statuses. I'll start with, what does it mean to be legal, a legal immigrant, and what does it mean to be a illegal immigrant? What does it mean to be documented? What does it mean to be undocumented? What do those things mean?
So, just to just sort of compress it all, when we use, I know a lot of times these words are interchanged a lot, and people don't understand because they're sort of legal terminologies. But when you say an individual is a legal immigrant, that is typically defines a foreign-born national who has come into the United States with legal authorization. Okay, and the form of legal authorization could be, for example, a work visa, a visitor visa. It could be paroled in the United States. It could be a refugee coming to the United States, but they're coming into the United States with legal authorization. And the word legal immigrant defines both temporary immigrants or people who are on non-immigrant visas, which are temporary work visas or temporary student visa. It also defines individuals who are here on immigrant visa, people who are immigrating to the United States on as permanent residents. When we define illegal, that's a person who is in the United States without legal authorization or permission. Okay, so it could define a person who came through the border and entered without permission, right, through the border. Or it could define a person who entered legally as a legal immigrant and then overstayed their status or their visa, right, which makes them now illegal, right, because they have overstayed their status. And then undocumented is synonymous with illegal in the sense that undocumented also defines a foreign national who either enters the United States without permission, okay? And it could be a foreign national again who entered through the border without permission, authorization from the US government, has no kind of documentation that would allow them to enter the United States legally. Or it could be an individual now who entered legally, but then, fell out of status for one reason or another, right? And nobody really knows their defined status anymore. And undocumented immigrants are typically subject to detainment and deportation upon seizure.
Okay, so I would assume a lot of us, because we came over the ocean and had some sort of port of entry, I would assume a lot of us came in as legal immigrants, and then those who, for whatever reason, lost their status then will be termed as illegal immigrants because they've lost the status that they came with, or also be called undocumented. But it's very unlikely that any of us came here illegally because of the port of entry that we'd have to go through, correct?
Correct. The majority of individuals, for example, from Africa, the majority of them come legally on some form of status, such as a visitor visa. A lot of individuals come in to study, study. Others come in and, so the most common form of visa that you see from individuals from Africa would be, for example, visitor visas and student visas, simply because the distance between the United States and Africa is very long. So most people, the only way to enter is through the airport, right? And in order for you to get through the airport through Customs and Border Protection is to have some form of status, So the individual will enter the United States with some form of status, and then some of them, of course, will fall out of status and now become defined as illegal.
Okay. We hear this a lot. Probably the company you work in, the company I work in, there's all these people who have work authorization. So let's talk about the different work authorization types that exist, especially for people, people from Kenya. What type of work authorizations exist?
So I won't go into too much detail because the details of each work visa are very complex and diverse, right? Yeah. But there's different forms of work authorization. So let's start with the most common one, right? Individual comes in as a student, an F1 student. Almost all F1 students are eligible to work 20 hours a week on campus, okay? And so they have work authorization to work 20 hours a week on campus. And then upon graduation, most of those F1 students are eligible for post-completion optional practical training, which gives them an employment authorization document to go out and work in a field that's related to their course of study, right? And individuals who graduate with STEM, with science, technology, engineering, mathematics, can extend that employment authorization for an additional 24 months, okay? So they can get an additional 25 months of STEM employment authorization. And usually what they get is really an employment authorization document. And that's to allow them to basically get training in the area in an area related to their course of study. So that's the most common. And a lot of those students will transition into the most common work visa in the United States, which is the H-1B visa. The H-1B visa is for individuals who have a bachelor's degree or higher, who are working in an occupation that requires a bachelor's degree or higher, okay? And it's the most common work visas. You also have what the L1 visas, and L1 visas are for multinational managers and executives and what they term specialized knowledge employees. These are individuals who work for multinational corporations. For example, an individual works in Nairobi for PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? and PricewaterhouseCoopers wants to move them to PricewaterhouseCoopers in Atlanta, right, or New York, right? And so they'll apply for an L1 visa because this individual is either a manager, an executive, a specialized knowledge employee, and then who will be able to, and then they'll use that to transfer that individual or move that individual to the United States to work for their offices. And then you have O1 visas. O1 visas are for like the extraordinary ability individuals, these are individuals who have demonstrated exceptional ability in the sciences, in arts, in business, and in education. They qualify for those visas. Then you have other work visas that are incident to status. For example, an individual who's applying for a green card, would be eligible for temporary employment authorization through the green card process. Similar to an individual who's applying for asylum, would be eligible for temporary employment authorization based on their asylum application. And you have individuals who I'm sure you've heard very much about temporary protected status, right? These are individuals who the U.S. government has designated that, they come from a country because of country conditions in the country. They've granted them some kind of temporary protection from the country conditions, and that comes with employment authorization. You also have employment authorization for individuals who came here as children, who are granted deferred DACA or deferred action for childhood arrivals, which is commonly known as DACA, and they get work authorization. So there's a varied, different refugees, for example, refugees come with a refugee status and they get employment authorized based on that refugee status. So there's varied kinds of employment authorization.
Wow, Barbara. I mean, I didn't even think there were that many.
And there's more, yeah.
When I framed this question, I was thinking 4 or 5, but it sounds like for the United States, for almost any situation that could exist to help someone seek work authorization, there's a way for it. You can come in with one type of visa, let's say the F1 visa for student, and then somehow transition to as far as green card and even US citizenship just through different work authorizations, right? It sounds like that could happen.
Correct. So it's a very broad area. And then you also have individuals who get work authorization or green cards by virtue of starting businesses in the United States, So you have all of that.
Tell us about that. What does that mean?
I don't do they're called EB-5s. That's not my specialization, but a lot of it, depends on the kind of investment, the amount of money that you're investing in the United States, and whether the position is employing a certain number of workers in the United States. There's also one option where you get to invest in sort of a project that the state or the government or county needs investors involved in, and you're able to get the EB-5. It's a very specialized area of immigration, and unfortunately, it's not in my area of expertise, so I can't really give too much of the details. But like you say, there's so many varied ways, to get status and to get employment authorization, which typically, will lead to path to permanent residency. And it goes back to just why it's important to be very informed, and to basically self-educate about the immigration process in this country. And I, so yeah.
Okay. You mentioned 2 things that I want to dig a little bit deep into, and then we'll go to the rapid fire portion of this session. You mentioned DACA. Now, there's a lot of maybe misinformation about what DACA means, who falls into that DACA category, and what are the benefits of those who fall into that DACA category. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll just briefly touch on DACA again, because I don't do much DACA work, but Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was the result of a program, executive order that was basically issued by the Obama administration, I think in 2012, okay? That's when DACA went into effect. And it sets forth certain criteria for individuals. It was basically set out to protect individuals who came here unlawfully or overstayed their visas as children. For example, an individual who was brought here as in 9-month-old across the border illegally by their parents, and now is by all means an American child, but for the paperwork, but for their legal status in the United States. And so DACA was passed to basically help those kinds of individuals. It has criteria that one has to meet. For example, so it's not considered legal status, but it protects those individuals from deportation, and it gives them employment authorization. Okay. And also they're able to apply for advanced parole to travel, outside of the United States. There's no path yet to legal permanent residency if you're a DACA recipient. Some years ago, they were talking about the DREAM Act, and they tried to pass it, which would have given this individual a path to U.S. citizenship, but that has not materialized yet. But it has certain criteria that an individual has to meet in order to qualify. They have to have entered the United States before the age of 16. They have to have continuously resided in the United States since June 15th of 2007, and they had to have been present in the United States on June 15th, 2012, when DACA was passed. And then the other additional factors, then, not to committed crime and the like that. And those individuals, are eligible for employment authorization, allows them to work here and everything, but there's not yet a path to permanent residency for those individuals.
So if I get this right, so if a child came here prior to 2007, stayed in the US, did not leave the country, and was here in 2012 when this DACA was passed, and meets that plus whatever other criteria exists, then they obtain what's called protected status. Plus,
it's kind of I wouldn't define it as protected status, but it's a temporary kind of status they get, right?
A temporary status.
Yeah, that allows them to work, because these kids are US. I mean, you can't compare. I mean, they're almost like US citizen kids, but for the paperwork, right? You imagine this child who came in here, for example, 2 years old, or a couple of months old, or lived here a long time. But the mere fact that you have DACA does not mean that you can't be deportable, for example, if you commit a serious crime or one of those factors, right? So it doesn't absolutely protect you from, deportation per se, right?
Okay. So if any of our children came after 2007, let's say came in 2008, 2009, they would not fit into the DACA program.
Like I said, I'm not a DACA expert, so you'd have to get, anybody who wants to explore DACA would have to really consult with an attorney who knows, the DACA requirements more than I would, but it has very specific guidelines on who qualifies, and you have to meet each of the criteria.
Okay. Naturalization was another word that you used. You said you get naturalized. So what is naturalization versus permanent residence versus US citizen, and what do those carry in terms of what you cannot do?
So foreign-born nationals in the United States have two ways of becoming U.S. citizen. Okay, we have only one way of becoming a U.S. citizen. You can be a U.S. citizen by birth in the United States, right? If you're born in the United States, it's called right of soil, where every child who's born in the United States acquires U.S. citizenship. Or you can go through naturalization, which is the process that foreign nationals go through to become U.S. citizens. Okay, that's what you call the naturalization process. Basically, the process that foreign-born nationals who come to the United States on various work visas and everything become permanent residents, then become citizens. Okay, so naturalization is just another term for citizenship.
Okay. Right. Already Edward is saying visas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the rapid fire part of this session. Well, just give you situations, just like we talked earlier. These are hypothetical. Doesn't mean it's me, Joanne, Florence, none of us, but it will probably apply to someone who wants to know this information. And then what we'll do after that, I would like, to give Joan and Florence voice to talk on some things, and then we'll go to question and answer. So if I'm a neighbor, then this is not advice. This is just saying, what are the good things or bad things that happen, or the implications, so to speak, about these statuses. You enter the country legally, but have overstayed. What's the implication of that?
So if you enter the country legally, but you've overstayed a visa, so now you become illegal, right? Because now you've stayed beyond the status that you're provided, and you're in violation of status, and you're subject to detainment and deportation, right? And individuals who overstay their status by less than 180 days, they don't trigger any unlawful presence bars. But if you overstay your status less than 180 days, but not less than a year, but 180 days, you over 180 days, but not a year, sorry, you trigger the 3-year bar to admissibility, which means if you leave the United States, you can't come back for 3 years. If you stay out of status for a year or more, you trigger the 10-year unlawful presence bar, which means if you depart the United States, you can't come back for 10 years. So that's the ramification. But an individual also who came in legally and overstayed their visa, they still have some pathway to permanent residency, right? So, for example, if that individual ends up marrying a United States, falling in love and marrying a United States citizen, they're able to acquire permanent resident status, because that process kind of forgives that unlawful presence, right? Okay. They may also be able to acquire permanent resident status through, for example, there's certain relief that's only available in immigration courts, right? Immigration proceedings such as cancellation of removal, right? If their deportation is going to cause, extreme hardship to a qualifying family member, right? So they still have some pathway because they entered into the United States legally, and they were inspected at the time of entry, but they overstayed their visa.
So talking about that, then, how does that change if you enter the country illegally? I don't think, again, it refers to us because of the geographic nature of how we came to the US. But is that different for someone who entered illegally?
It's different for an individual. An individual who entered illegally, as I mentioned, is a person who entered the United States without permission. And so because of that, by virtue of that, they have very limited options once they enter the United States, because they were not inspected per se, right? And so even if they were to marry a U.S. citizen or any one of those situations, they'd still have to return, go outside of the United States, get a waiver of inadmissibility because they came in without inspection, and then be able to, adjust their status in some form or another. But the fact that they entered without inspection significantly limits their options. So in some ways, we're very benefited by our geographic distance to the United States in this matter. Yeah. You'd also be surprised at how many Africans still come through the southern border. Oh, yeah, that's okay. But yeah, we are somewhat advantaged, those of us who come from long distances, because a lot of times the only way in is through legal immigration, right? You enter with some kind of status. Yes. Okay. What about those who have legal status, right? The visas you mentioned earlier, you said, visitor, student, etc., but they're working without authorization. Those individuals are technically in violation of status, right? So, for example, when you enter the United States on a visitor visa, you have to make certain representations to the consulate, and also it has limited things that you can do with a visitor visa. Okay, so for example, you can visit for a temporary period of time. If you came in as a business visitor, you can attend conferences, you can attend meetings, you can project scope with the company. If you're working for, if you're coming to, to the US company here to meet with people, you can come in for training, but you cannot engage in what they call productive employment. Okay, same thing for B2s, which are, visitors for tourism, right? So you are not allowed to engage in productive employment, which is anything that a US citizen can do. So in terms of work. So individuals who come in on a visitor visa, for example, and then work, they're technically in violation of status, right? Similar to students, right? A student visa, allows you to, it allows employment on campus. It allows curricular practical training, which you can get employment in the course of your study to get training, in a field that's related to your study. It allows post-completion optional practical training, and it also allows STEM employment authorization, right? So if you're working outside of any of those, so for example, I'm only eligible for 20 hours of school employment, but I'm working, elsewhere, technically you're in violation of status, okay? But in order for somebody to find a violation, it would have to be either an immigration officer or a judge to determine, violation of status, but technically you're in violation of your status, right? So a lot of those individuals, especially students, because of the risk it imposes on their status, especially going forward, it can create, complications for them at the time now they apply, like, for STEM or PT or stuff like that, or they're going to apply for H-1B, then the issue may come up, raise head of unlawful employment, right? And so it's always, I always recommend for students, for example, that, we all understand when we, a lot of us have to self-support and stuff like that. There's always an option to also, talk to your designated school official about getting a hardship employment authorization document, and if hardship employment authorization documents allow you to work off campus, it's based on your financial need to work and, and all of that. But that's one thing I advise my foreign national student, students who come to me and they're like, I need to work because my parents can't pay my school fees and this is their situation, and, and the like, and, working 20 hours a week on campus is not cutting it. I'll tell them, talk to your DSO, see if they can grant you, hardship employment authorization document, and you'd be surprised at how many of them have been successful at getting it just by explaining the situation, proving that, their parents' financial situation has changed, and the DSO will grant them a hardship employment authorization document, and they'll be able to, we'll recommend employment. We'll grant, but we'll recommend. Yeah.
I do want to second that because, I've been here many years, and that was one of the ways I was able to do so, was to actually go and talk to the, international student advisor and say, hey, I'm going through this hardship. And I think a lot of us, perhaps, I don't want to assume, but may think that that's harder than it is, right? More difficult than it is. But you ask, and they sign behind your little I-20, and you are maintaining your status because you're working with authorization. So for those of you who are in that situation, not advice, but something to think about. All right. So this happens quite a bit where a family member has legal status, but other family members do not, right? So for example, you are a student, you have your 2-year visa, your spouse comes here or your child comes here as a visitor, and then they end up overstaying. So you, in some ways, you have your within status based on some of the things you talked about earlier, but then your children or the rest of your family is not. And this may be even anything from visitor student to even things like having a green card, but your spouse and your children do not, or having a H-1B visa, you came, and then your spouse and your kids overstayed. What are the implications of that, either for you or for them?
Yeah, that's a tricky situation because a lot of times, and it goes back to, like, a lot of times when you encounter those situations, it's just people who are just not informed, right? Because there's no reason for your spouse or your child to be out of status when you have status, right? So say, for example, I'm an F1 student and my wife comes to visit and then she decides to stay. well, I can apply for change of status for her to an F2, which is a dependent status for an F1 student, right? Or my minor child comes with a mom on B1s to visit me, or B2s to visit me, and I'm a graduate student and an F1, I can apply F2 visas for them, right? If I'm a permanent resident, I can sponsor my spouse for permanent residency, right? It's just going to take a little longer, but it shields them from, and during that time, I can become a citizen. And then now, even though they're here unlawfully, because I'm a citizen, it kind of forgives that unlawful presence, and they can now get permanent residency through me, right? And then there's a situation of the children. Keep in mind that children do not accrue unlawful presence until the age of 18, okay? So, and children under the age of 18 technically have not accrued unlawful presence, So you'd want to, grant some kind of, status to that child before they turn the age of 18, and, ensure that they maintain status after the age of 18, because they age out, they are now considered adults, after the age of 18. And so, and it goes back to just why it's important to be fully informed about immigration, as informed as possible, and to also consult with licensed attorneys at the beginning of the process, because then you'd not be able to kind of make those errors that, kind of cost families significantly. But you're right, there's lots of families that are mixed status families, right? So where you, like you said, you have some people in the house who have status and others have no status,
So,
but if you can bestow status on a loved one, that's what you need to do,
bestow status on a loved one. And
Yeah.
it sounds like there's, like, even from the beginning, when we talked about work authorization and talk about getting back to be quote unquote documented, there's a lot of options. If you have a F1, you can request a F2, right? And I think this is really important. So I want to double click on this for just a second. You said children do not accrue unlawful status until the age of 18. I'm assuming at the age of 18, then they go through that cycle, which you said after age of 18 plus 6 months, 18 plus a year.
Correct.
Is that correct? Just do you mind just double clicking on that? Because we may have people who have kids who are about to turn 18 or who are teenagers, and they need this information so they know what will happen at age 18 to their kids.
So if you have a minor child who's under the age of 18, you have some way of getting them some kind of status, because technically they do not accrue unlawful presence till they're 18, So that child technically can depart the United States and apply for an F1 visa, because they have not accrued unlawful presence, so they're not subject to, I guess, they can apply to some kind of status, right? And that's what you want them to do, to apply for some kind of status.
Okay. Whew. I didn't know that was good information. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, just a couple more, then I'll turn it over to Joan and Florence. One of the things that has come up a lot thus far is people who have committed crimes. Right? And I honestly, I don't know how much this affects the Kenyan community. I know with especially Latin American community, this is a big thing, because you commit a crime, you feel defenseless because, let's say, you're undocumented or you're illegal, you can't even report it. Like, there's all that being scared of, should I report this crime because I'm undocumented? So I want to talk through a couple of things with you. One is, what are the implications if you're here illegally and you commit a crime, right? So you overstayed your visa, you're a Kenyan who overstayed their visa, committed a crime. Or even, let's say you had a green card and you commit a crime. Or you're here illegally and a crime is committed against you or against your family, and you want to report it, but then you're not sure if you report it, what's going to happen. So I know there's a number of things in that question, but could you talk through some of the implications of that?
Oh, so crimes, serious crimes do have adverse consequences on immigration status. And you have crimes that are felonies, then you have crimes that are considered crimes involving moral turpitude. Okay? And all those have consequences on your immigration status, right? And so anytime, first of all, if you in a situation, you're a permanent, hold on. So sorry, it's Friday. The kids are back from pizza. Mommy, can you come and sleep over? I'm on the call. Sorry, I'm on the call. So Mom, is this half an hour? I am so sorry, folks. So sorry about that.
Don't be sorry. It's all right.
I have to talk about it when I'm done. I was trying to call you. I am so sorry, my people. Trying to manage multitask here. So, important thing that I was trying to say was, if you're a permanent resident and you're caught in a situation where you're being charged with a crime, it's very important to consult an immigration lawyer and also a criminal attorney who is well versed in immigration law, so that they can tell you what the consequences of pleading a certain way will have on your immigration status. Okay, whether you're here on a temporary work visa, whether you're a permanent resident, you're a student, because people do get caught up in unfortunate situations. You know, we see a lot of individuals get caught up with DUIs, for example, you know, and DUIs it can be a very serious offense, you know, and if it rises to the level of a crime involving moral turpitude, it's going to impact your immigration status, you know. And so I encourage people to just try and avoid, you know, don't put yourself in that situation, period, you know. If you're here and you're on some temporary visa and you're a permanent resident, you cannot afford to risk, you know, being charged with DUI, domestic violence, felony charges, and the like, you know. I don't know how many of you have seen a recent article regarding an individual here in Georgia who came in here as a child, had a successful barbershop business, and basically, you know, is in detention for a crime they committed when they were 16, you know, and it was forgiven by the state. The offense was forgiven by the states. I think, you know, the record was either expunged by the state or so, but this individual, it's not impacting their status, you know. So even with young children, it's important to talk to your children about, you know, and it goes back, and I'll let Joan and you know cover that topic about, you know, talking to your children and you know, informing your children about their status and the consequences of engaging in certain conduct, right? Because, you know, if your American friend is caught with marijuana, that's, you know, they're just gonna, you know, they're gonna pay a fine and go home. If you're on a temporary visa and you're caught with marijuana, that's a drug offense, you know. You see. So and so you know, it's very important to talk to talk and be honest about these things with your families, and also just, you know, realize that criminal offenses do result in severe immigration consequences.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that even if the crime is forgiven based on, let's say, the way your plea were doing when you committed that crime, that does not absolve from the immigration implications of that crime, unless you're a U.S. citizen. Then hopefully you get the same sort of privileges that someone who was born. Maybe if you're a naturalized citizen, you get the same benefits, so to speak, of someone who was born in the US. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, because even permanent residency is not permanent per se. It can be taken away, you know, and for serious offenses, it can be taken away. You can be a permanent resident and commit a very severe offense that results in incarceration. And right after incarceration, you're going to go into ICE custody, and they're going to start the process of revoking your permanent residency on the basis of that crime. And now you're subject to deportation.
Permanent residence is not permanent.
Is not permanent. I am so sorry. Could you hold on a minute?
Yeah, of course. Wow. All right. So while Barbara, while we give a temporary relief there, hopefully this is informative for you. I think Joan had said earlier, if there's any questions, please post them in the chat, and then I'll open up for questions in about 10 minutes, because some of you may have questions that you want to ask Barbara or myself or Joan or Florence. But especially that last point has really sunk in, that permanent residence is not permanent. So Okay, I have just one last question, then I'll turn it over to Joan and Florence. A lot of us, I mean, Kenya is our country, Datsun is our car. I think that was a song from way back. Datsun doesn't even exist anymore. I think it's Nissan now, right? So a lot of people are very we have family members who are still back home. We have, maybe assets that are home. There's all these things that we're losing loved ones at home, and yet we're here. And in some way, we violated our status. We are in that, what we call the legal status at the top of the call. If you're here illegally and you need to travel home for any one of those things, what's the implication of that?
If you're here illegally and you have not resolved your status and you travel home, as I said, if you're here illegally for more than a year, you trigger the unlawful presence bars. So the moment you step outside of the United States, whether to go to attend to a family emergency or on vacation unknowingly, you cannot come back, for 10 years. That's an automatic bar to admissibility for 10 years. And after 10 years, you have to apply for a waiver of admissibility. You have to have a basis for coming back. So maybe you were sponsored by a loved one, a sister maybe who was here, for example, and now the visa priority date is coming, and now you can apply for that waiver after 10 years. So that's what, and it goes back to just why it's so important to be, really informed about immigration and the process. The immigration process in the United States is very complex, even for those of us who practice, and right now under the current administration, it's constantly shifting, right? Things that we thought, could not happen are happening, and so, it's so important that, you get the legal advice you need to kind of walk through your process. And a lot of times, if you talk to an experienced attorney, you might even be surprised that you actually have some options, right? Or, in the long term, they'll set up a pathway for you to actually acquire status, And I think when, for example, you have a child who's a US citizen and they're close to 21, as soon as that child turns 21, they can file for you as long as you entered legally. And because you qualify as an immediate relative, that forgives the unlawful presence bars, So, I encourage everyone, talk to the experienced attorneys who can explore the options with you, understand your particular circumstances, and kind of, guide you through a process where you can try to obtain some kind of, status in the United States.
Okay, so it sounds like what I'm taking away from this is there's options. There's options. There's unlikely any situation that hasn't been explored that would at least inform you if there's a pathway or if there's not. And also, if there's not a pathway, say for you, there may be a pathway for your children in the future because they're in some sort of protected status. So going back to this, and thank you so much for hanging tight. Let's talk about kids. Right? There's many situations I'm sure a lot of us are in where we haven't told our kids about our status. We don't know if it's appropriate for us to tell them. We don't know what it's going to mean to them for them to hear that. So how much information is too much to share? And is it dependent on, obviously it's dependent on the child that you have. Is it age appropriate? And what kind of information do you share? I'll open it to anyone. Okay,
Do you want me to answer it? Or?
Barbara, let's start with you. Get the legal perspective. Yeah.
Oh, I'll provide. I believe information is power, and given the times that we live in, as long as the child is old enough to comprehend, um, you need to talk with your children. Whether it's a mixed status family, whether we're in a situation where the parents have status, don't have status, and the kids are US1 citizen children, you need to talk to your children so that, if anything were to happen, they can anticipate that, and also just in terms of family planning, in terms of, strategizing as a family. If this happens, what do we need to do, and reassuring the children that, you're working on this, and, you're trying to get some status, and maybe someday they'll be able to help you also with that, but, you need them to understand that, these things. And if mommy doesn't call, you have 5 people who, their contact information, you have their information, you can call those 5 people. You need to make a family plan, in terms of attorneys of power and guardianships, temporary guardianships over your children, and reassure your children that if nothing's gonna happen, but if something happens to mommy, auntie so and so is gonna, is gonna pick you up at school and we'll be fine. You have to reassure them. Children are very much more understanding than we take them to be, and they're very perceptive about situations. And I think a lot of times when you talk to them, you remove the uncertainty. They can tell when you're tiptoeing around the house, and they do hear, they do hear the conversations, no matter. And so, I think it's very important to talk to children. And if you have older children, for example, now in situations where your children don't have status either, it's important for them to know, because it's a matter of life and death for them. It's a matter, it's important for them to know that, because if you're 16 or 17 or 18 and you're in college in a frat and you decide to go crazy and do something crazy and get arrested, the consequences for you versus your frat brothers is very different. Now you got a kid who's grown up in the US since they were 2, being shipped to a country where they've never been. But if you tell that child, look, this is a situation, we came here to give you a better life, and this is what's going on, and you don't have status, and even the child themselves, they'll want to figure out how they can get out of this. They may be eligible for DACA, or they may consult with a lawyer, and the lawyer tells them, you can fix your status by doing A, B, C, D. You're 16, you can travel out, you can come back, on a student visa or things like that. So it's important to be, it's difficult, and it's difficult conversations to have with children. But my personal philosophy and the way I approach even my own kids is I tell my children there's no conversation that we cannot have. There's no conversation that's barred in my household, because a lot of times children get into trouble because they're just curious. If you take away the curiosity and the mystery, and they comprehend so much more, so much more than we give them credit for.
Thank you, Barbara. Joan, over to you.
So to add on to what Barbara has said, I think one of the things that maybe we collectively need to consider is that as much as America is home, we also have a home. and Kenya is not a bad place. It may have been a bad place, or it may have been not ideal for you when you were growing up, whatever the reason that made you come here. I find that a lot of us threaten our children with punishment to send them to Kenya. And that makes them believe that Kenya is not a good place. So when you have that 16-year-old or 17-year-old or 18-year-old or a child who has DACA or whatever and has ended up being picked up by ICE and is being deported, they don't associate Kenya. They don't associate with Kenya as a good place to be. So my point number one is, let's collectively talk about Kenya in a positive way, whereby our children actually believe it's a place they can go back to, because we are not like Syria, Afghanistan, or Ukraine, where if you are being sent back somewhere, you do not have a place to go to. Now, obviously, there's variances. There's people who are here for many generations, and therefore there's nobody to go back to. But having a connection, a solid connection with home, is helpful for our children, so that even if they're told, like what Barbara is saying, your child can leave, go apply for a visa and come back. We all know that those visas are not instant. They need to be in a place where they feel safe with people who they feel safe with, right? You're not sending your kid to Mexico to strangers. You want to send them home to a place that is safe. So one is just let's collectively treat Kenya as a place that we can go back to. Two, age appropriateness is super important. So you cannot tell a 5-year-old what you would tell a 16 or 17-year-old. They need to understand exactly what you're talking about. So how you talk to your 5-year-old is not going to be how you talk to your 16-year-old or your 18-year-old or your 20-something-year-old. We have 20-something-year-olds who think they're Americans and they're not Americans. And those are the ones who go to the places with other American kids and get caught up in messes that they shouldn't be caught up in. So guilty by association. They just were riding in a car and then they're caught, and somebody had weed or something in the car, and there is your child being called a criminal and is sent back to a country that they've never been in. So I need us to talk to our children who are age 10 and above, honestly. And that means we have to be truthful to ourselves as well. Because when you're lying to a child, you're probably lying to yourself and creating this narrative that is real in your head when it's not real. So we need to be truthful to ourselves. We need to be truthful to our children. And we need to create emotional safety where our children can come talk to us about anything and everything without the fear of retribution. Because if you do not create emotional safety, if you're not a person or a home where children can come say, this is happening and I'm afraid, or I had this, what does it mean to us? Then your children are not going to tell you what is happening, and therefore you're always going to be caught off guard. So for now, that's what I would say to add on to what Barbara said from a legal and also from an age-appropriate perspective.
I don't disagree with what you've said, Joanne. I do like you've drawn the line at 10. I think 10 is appropriate, right? I imagine anyone who's slightly older, 12, 13, starts blaming you for why did you bring me here? Why did you put me in this situation? I mean, I appreciate that you're telling me the truth, but why are you doing that? You are literally changing my life by telling me that I'm not supposed to be here. So Florence, you're the teenage whisperer, right? That you know how teenagers think and how they're going to respond to what Joanne said, what Barbara said. We have the right intentions. We now are educated enough to say, this is the situation and I'm letting you know. And you can discern the type of friends you're going to hang around with. You know why you can't get a driver's license. You know why you can't travel out of the country. We've all been teenagers. We're going to fight back. Florence, how does that work?
It starts from what Joanne said and Barbara said. You have to be honest with your kids, right? We have as parents, and I'm glad we had this conversation because it opens our eyes to a lot of information, and that I hope will give us a platform where we'll start parenting our kids without fear. Because parenting with fear is what causes that disconnect, that your child will fight back and say, why are you bringing me in this situation? Why did you do this to me? But if you have that conversation with them and have an honest conversation, it will reduce the anxiety. You will come up with a plan together, because regardless if you're telling them or you're not, they are learning these things. First and foremost, they have names that don't sound like American, quote unquote. Does that mean they have to start working with their passports? Those are the kind of conversation you should be having. What are you telling your kids? Because if you're not telling them, they are experiencing it. We have had cases where kids are taken out of schools. So even if you don't talk to them, they are thinking these things. So I encourage every parent to have this open conversation. You know your kid best, and have a conversation the way you talk to them that you feel most connected to them. You're muted.
I said so much. Don't parent with fear, reduce anxiety, come up with a plan. At the end of the day, is to come up with a plan, right?
Yes.
So Barbara had started hinting a little bit about it. And she said something like, what is the plan? What plan do you have for when that time comes? I don't have a plan. I'm scared of making a plan because I don't even want Joanne to know that I don't have, well, she knows I don't have papers, but I don't want, there's this Kenyanism, I don't know whether to call it pride or machino, like there's all these things. I know I don't want, or maybe it's I don't want to bother someone with this. Can you bust that myth for me? Joan, can you bust that I shouldn't feel too shy or too prideful to say, okay, Florence, look, I want you to be anti-Flo in case something like this happens. How does that happen? How do we get through that?
So I think that aspect of us as a people is very layered. It's very, very layered. It's not a one size fits all. Many of us have friends, then we have acquaintances. We like to call people friends when they're not friends. We like to expose our children to people who are not safe for them. So I think it starts with, who do your children know and trust? Do you even know who your children know and trust? And then the layer above that is, do you trust the people who your children know and trust? Are they people who gossip about other people in front of your children? Are they people who can hold space for your children when your children are suffering? Are they people who are capable of holding space for you when you're suffering? There is the other aspect of it is, are they financially capable of taking your children if you're not there? Because sometimes somebody is willing, but they don't have the capability. And then there's capacity. If I'm Joanne and I have 3 kids and I'm a single mom, and Florence is my friend and she's a single mom of 5 kids, Florence is not going to have the capacity and capability to take in 3 more kids as a single mom. So we also have to really think strategically about who our people are. Are they willing? Are they capable? Do they have the capacity? Those are always the 3 things I say. Is somebody willing? If they're willing, are they capable? If they're capable, do they have the capacity? And also, from a child's perspective, sometimes the people we think are safe, our children do not think are safe. Their interactions with those people are not safe. So I think from your home, you have to have these conversations. You have to pay attention to your child's body language, to how they react and respond to the people you put them around. So you have to be very attentive, and not from a place of fear, like Florence said. It's just from a place of curiosity. If your child says, I don't like Auntie Joanne, because you've also told them to call somebody auntie, and that person is not their auntie in real life. You need to pay attention to why they don't like Auntie Joanne. If Auntie Joanne may be mean to them, or does Auntie Joanne just have bad energy? Because we are all energy in motion, and children feel every little thing that is happening to them and around them. We were taught in our school systems, in our homes, in our environments, to ignore how we feel, especially when an adult is involved. We need to give our children a chance to trust their instincts, trust their intuition, and also sometimes to choose their people. And their people might not be our people. And we have to be okay with that.
I'll just add just a little to what Joanne was saying. For me, it goes back to just communication, you know, and honesty with your children, and hearing them out, and it's important to talk to your children about everything, and have no boundaries in terms, because you're their safe adult in their lives, and you're the role model in their lives, and if they can't talk to you about anything going on with them or anything of that sort, then it creates secretiveness and it creates distance, right? But you have to also be open to talking about hard topics, even hard topics that you may not be so comfortable about talking. And like I said, kids are very perceptive, even little ones, you just have to talk to them at their level, so it's like, okay, why don't you like Auntie Joanne? And be patient. Don't jump like that's unacceptable. Why don't you like her? What happened? When did it happen? You have to kind of get to their level and have that conversation with them, so that they feel that they're being heard, and that you're responsive to their concern. And also, part of planning, why it's important to plan for any contingency, any situation, is that you're able to also kind of have this conversation if the kids are old enough. Like, who would you like to take care of if something happened? Who are you comfortable with? And you take their consideration into effect when you're making those decisions. You see, because the children will tell you, "Oh, we like this person," or "We feel comfortable with this person. They've always been part of our lives," and And then also financially, you should make contingencies for that as well. If this happens, how am I going to provide for the kids in that middle period when I'm trying to decide what everything's happening? And so it's very important to kind of have a family plan, and involve your kids in that process. And my hope is that each of us has a trusted adult. It doesn't have to be even a family member or anything. It could be somebody outside of that. It could be a very close colleague that you've been working with for 20 years, who's part of your family and everything. And they're a great person, right? And somebody who will not judge you when you confide in them. And I find that part of the reason why people also struggle a lot is this inability to talk about their issues. Because sometimes if you're able to talk about your issues to trusted people, you can actually figure out some solutions. You can actually come up with some solutions. Yeah.
And I think that's why we're here today, right? So I'm going to open it up for questions, but before I do so, Florence, I'm going to call on you again. These people are completely contradicting everything that I've known. They're saying that I need to talk to my kids about this stuff. I'm seeing myself as the protector. I'm not going to tell you that I'm illegal. I'm not going to tell you that you're illegal because I'm protecting you. That's my job as a dad, a father, a protector. I'm not going to tell you at age 11, 12 that, oh, by the way, yeah, your friends will start getting their driver's license and you're not going to get it because of this, that, or the other, right? And I think a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people that I've talked to on these issues. Why am I wrong? Why is my protective act wrong?
Because you're lying to your child. Let's start there, right? I say it's important to do this the same way you would approach estate planning, like Barbara was saying. If your kids are more important, if your money is more important than your kids, then you have your priorities displaced. Talk to your kids as much as you can, as early as possible. They will feel betrayed, yes. They'll feel a certain way, yes. But have you been truthful? Yes. Be truthful to them, then they'll be able to come and talk to you later. And to add on to that, I mean, if you're here in Kenya, like going back to Joanne's, no, I'm not in Kenya, you're in the US and you are telling your kids that Kenya is bad. Do they really know your history? What kind of thing will they write on as a your eulogy when you die? Have you written your eulogy yourself? Because we have this tendency as Kenyan parents to tell our kids about our bad life, the good old days, and then at the same time we talk about our bad experiences in Kenya. That's a mixed bag of issues, but to go back to your question, being truthful to your kids is the best gift you can give to them, and not to lie to them.
I'm working on it, Florence. All right, we have over 20 people here, so I'm interested in any questions. Let me see what we have in the chat. Francesca was saying, this guidance applies even further than just immigration matters. If you're a single parent with minors, what happens if something happens to you, right? The whole family plan, especially if you're a single parent. How do you approach this discussion with adults who know who are out of status, right? Have any of you had any good experience or have conversations on how to respectfully start that conversation? So I think what I do is asking is, yeah, these people, and we know them, right? We've hanged with them, and then you're moving on, and you fixed your status, but they haven't. How do you start? How do you approach this discussion with adults?
So I think that, right now, especially the risk is so elevated, right? That all of us are feeling it, right? And it's a nice time to have a conversation, especially if you're one of their trusted friends, and say, hey, I know you've been having this situation. How's it going? Have you considered, these options and everything? Or you can say, I was in this forum and I had this, and, these are some things you considered. I thought we might be interested in looking at and considering, right? I mean, we put so much weight in conversation. Sometimes it doesn't have to be that serious. It doesn't have to come up like, I always say the worst way to start a conversation is say, I need to talk to you. It could be something happy and suddenly you're thinking, oh my God, something's really bad, right? It could be as simple as like, oh, by the way, I was in a forum and I had this, they had this interesting conversation and they provided these documents, and it made me think about you, and how are things going on with you? You should look up that forum and stuff like that. It might give you some ideas of how to deal with that situation, right? That's my 2 cents about it.
Do not fear having those conversations. And I like maybe leveraging either information that you have or, sessions like this where they can at least get the information for themselves, which brings me to probably the biggest thing over the last, I would say, 2 months
I
She's
have a
receiving.
question though first before we move on to the next thing, Ichi, or maybe a comment. I think also if there are people you know and you have been in discussion with them about their status, it's okay to have that conversation. It's okay to start the conversation with them and ask questions about their plans and whatever. If it's not somebody you're close with who you know about their status and they have not told you, you got that information from somebody else, please do not go start asking people for their status, because that's how we create problems in the community. That's how we create trust problems in the community. So I think it's important for us to also be considerate about the person on the receiving end and the level of anxiety that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, right? So I would also say, from the perspective of somebody you know, starting to have the conversation from a caring perspective, not necessarily from the perspective of them having papers, but how are you sleeping at night? Things like that actually tell you how the person is truly doing. If you notice that the person is maybe drinking more than they used to, or doing things that are maybe more destructive to them than they normally do, that is an invitation to start having a conversation with the person from a caring perspective. And maybe when you're having that conversation, the papers thing might come up. But most people who are struggling, really, especially from a mental health perspective, will seek love and care in the most unkind ways. So that is for us to step back and see and ask ourselves, what is going on in Florence's life, and how can I, in a very gentle way, reach her so that we can help herself, or just help her.
I really like that, John. And Edu, I hope you heard that, right? There's I know this person, we're close enough to where I can talk about this situation. Then there's maybe this person and I are not close enough for me to engage in that way, but I can come from a caring and that conversation and sort of evolve that conversation into the intentionality of what are you doing, right? And Francesca also says, it's a great way to have conversation, even with your children. Chat when you're having a walk out in the garden, not necessarily we need to talk, like you don't have to structure it, right? Which brings me to one of the reasons why we thought this was important is the videos that are being sent all over on WhatsApp, right? And it's interesting, this has been a conversation opener for a lot of me and my friends in chat groups. There was this, I think she was from Ivory Coast or something, and she said, you cannot use two of your passports. Then people started giving advice. No, you can't. No, you can't. If you can, right? So people started coming from providing their knowledge based on things that they don't know, right? But the benefit of that was it became a conversation starter. So Barbara, you may or may not know this, so I'm curious to hear your legal perspective. Is the way I've seen it, and Joan, Florence, help me out here, right? Is the way I've seen it, we have some Kenyan-born people who have become naturalized and are U.S. citizens and have a U.S. passport and travel using the U.S. passport. You have some Kenyans who have a US passport and now have a Kenyan passport. So they have two passports that they use for travel. So they'll leave to go to Kenya, use the Kenyan passport as entry to Kenya, and then use the US passport as entry into the US. So using the two passports, quote unquote, independently. Then there's those who have likely applied for dual citizenship. So they're carrying one passport, but it has dual citizenship. So they can use that one passport to travel back and forth. At least as far as I know, those are the three situations that I've heard or I know of. What are the implications for those people who are traveling to Kenya with any of those three?
It just depends on the country rules, right? Does your country allow dual citizenship or not? And what the rules of entry in that particular country? So, my understanding from the way it works in Kenya is that you can travel as a U.S. citizen, but you can request permission to forgo the visa. I guess when you travel in a U.S. passport, you have to pay a visa fee or some kind of fee, but you can be exempted from that fee if you present a valid Kenyan passport, right?
Yeah.
So I strongly discourage anybody playing footsie with kind of trying to get out with one passport, enter with another one. You have to be just cognizant of the country rules, right? Of course, there are countries that don't even permit. If you come from a country that doesn't permit dual citizenship, you don't want to do that, right? Because you may get your passport revoked, right, from that country or anything of that sort. So, just be informed about the country rules, and you don't want to get yourself in trouble in another country. And keep in mind, flights do have flight logs, and assuming on those flight logs they log in passport information and things like that, and so you don't want to be caught in a situation where you're walking to another country and presenting a different kind of document that's different from what's in the log, or in the system, and now you're in trouble, for something that you really should not have done. It seems cute when it's, when you're trying to do something like that until you get in trouble about it, so just don't do it. Don't do it, If you travel in a U.S. passport, travel in a U.S. passport and pay the visa fee. And if you have a valid Kenyan passport, for example, and it allows you to present the Kenyan passport and forgo the fee, do that. But don't play games like that. You're going to get yourself in trouble inevitably. Yeah.
Can I add something? So when I was filing, and I'm going to use myself as an example because this is my story, right? When I filed for dual citizenship in Kenya, because there's laws that Kenya has as a country, whereby at some point there was no dual citizenship, and then it became valid. And so those who had citizenship in other countries before the dual citizenship came about did not automatically have dual citizenship. You have to declare. And so your passport, either your US passport is stamped or they give you a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper, right? And so I want us to remember that just because our country has dual citizenship, it does not mean you have dual citizenship. Having two passports does not mean you have dual citizenship. You need to declare with Kenya that you are also an American citizen. Then you have to go through the due diligence of them doing the background check and whatever, and then granting you dual citizenship. So like Barbara is saying, let's stop spreading rumors and lying or talking about that information, because it is absolutely important for us to use the right documents when you're out there, because the US is not going to allow you to do shady things with their passport, and Kenya should not allow you to do shady things with their passport either. That passport is a legal document, and we need to respect it from whichever country it comes from.
Joan, I'm so glad you said that, because sometimes I find it difficult to explain to people the difference between having two passports and dual citizenship, right? And I think, as you so eloquently said, there's a process to have that stamp or that dual citizenship stamp in either one of the passports. Having two passports doesn't say you're dual citizen. It just means that I don't know the legal word Barbara said, but you can forgo your visa to enter, right? And as Joyce Wright said, 30 bob, surely let's employ Kenyans. So I use my ETA to go to Kenya. Let's see. Joyce says, not what the hustle, save 30, be consistent with one passport. Francesca, when I got Kenyan citizenship, my British passports was endorsed as a Kenyan citizen with the right of entry. I did not know that there was a difference between dual citizen and 2 passports. Yep. And I think there's even further implications that, may rear their heads at some point in time if you gave up one citizenship or another in terms of land rights. I don't even know. I don't even want to get into what that could mean. All right.
Somebody like Angela, my daughter, she served in the US military.
Okay.
She's a Kenyan-born citizen. She cannot have dual citizenship with any other country because she served in the US military. Those are things we have to educate ourselves with.
Say that again.
So if you have served in the military in the US or in any other country, there are stipulations that come with that, because you are declaring that you do not have ties with any other government or whatever, like you're not tied to any other government, right? You don't pledge allegiance to another government. And therefore, as a veteran, you cannot go now get a Kenyan passport and become a dual citizen, because you're violating what you signed up for. So those are the things that we have to understand when we tell our children, join the military, you'll still be Kenyan, do this. Like, let's not allow ourselves to be ignorant about things we do without knowing the implications of it.
Got it. And as Barbara said at the top of the call, if you have any questions, seek legal counsel, right? Like, the price you have to pay up front to understand the implications of this is probably cheaper than the price you'd pay if you are caught up in any of this. We're at 9:30 today. I decided I'm going to be true American. I'm going to stick to time. I do want to encourage anyone who's here who may have a burning question. I say this a lot on Wezesha. People come in out of their own accord. Wezesha is about empowerment through shared experiences. That's why we have Florence, Joan, Barbara here. Please take advantage of this conversation that we have. Ask questions. If you can come off mute and ask live questions if you want. You can ask them on the chat. I really want all 26 plus of you who have joined to come out feeling more empowered about taking this situation within yourself and to your families in terms of immigration and its impact on our community. So I encourage you. I'll be quiet and ask if anyone has any questions. Please come off mute and ask any questions you may have. And if you don't, I'll start calling on some people. Nah. Okay. This session is free. One day it will cost you guys, huh?
It just means we did an amazing job informing them and there's no questions.
You always look for the good stuff over there. All right. Okay. Barbara. Actually, we'll go in reverse. We'll go from left, my screen left to right. So Florence, any final thoughts? Any final piece of advice?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, hold on. I see Wambui has raised her hand. Wambui, go ahead.
Hey, thank you guys for doing this. I have a question. I always see this people on Instagram posting stuff about, I don't know, they're being asked to sign documents at the airport by TSA, especially for the green card holders. So can you speak more to that if you haven't already?
I haven't heard anything of that sort. I'm actually in this CBP sort of liaison in my chapter of American Immigration Lawyers Association, And we've not had anything of that sort. We kind of, the American Immigration Lawyers Association always reports on anything, any trends that are happening and things like that. And just be mindful that, right now there's so much anxiety out there, and there's people posting all kinds of strange things online, and these individuals who are not even immigration professionals are giving immigration advice online. I've seen some of those videos where the advice is very questionable. If you want to get solid immigration advice, I would recommend a couple of organizations that you should be following, and looking at their websites, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the American Immigration Council, the American Civil Liberties Union, and anything that's happening that's really impacting people would come up, in any one of those forums. To my knowledge, I have not had anything about permanent residents being made to sign anything of that sort, or any kind of document, unusual document by. I can't speak to the particular situation because we don't know what the facts are and what document they were asked to sign. But I've not had anything of that sort. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
So maybe that brings up a question, Barbara, that has come up in many forums, which is, as I walk down the street and law enforcement approaches me about related to immigration, what can they ask me? What should I provide? What should I carry? Should I be carrying my passport with me? Should my kids be carrying their birth certificates with them to school? Like, what's the right thing to do in terms of the documents you carry?
So we've been getting a lot of questions from individuals, and about what documents should I carry with me to show my legal status, right? Or if I don't have legal status, what documents should I be? First of all, it's very important to know that even if, legal and illegal immigrants both have rights under the U.S. Constitution, and it's very important to be informed of those rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right not to sign any documents. You have the right to counsel, And so if some random person, first of all, pulls you on the street, you need to know who that person is, right? I have the right to ask for your identification and ask you, and be polite. Always be polite, be considerate, because anything you do could escalate the situation, right? And so always remember to be courteous and considerate. But it's fine to ask the person to, first of all, identify who they are, right? And, show you their documentation, of who they're claiming to be, and, present that documentation and allow you to inspect it. And then, it's fine to also, to ask them, am I under arrest? Why have you stopped me? What are the reasons for the stop? Because nobody's, even ICE officers or police officers, they have rules they have to follow under the US Constitution. And so you have to be kind of bold and courageous about, protecting your rights as a person, not in any aggressive way, but in a very polite way, and say, with all due respect, I can't answer that question. I'm choosing to remain silent. Are you arresting me, or am I free to leave this situation? And so you need to be very clear in those situations and know your rights. I shared a couple of pamphlets on knowing your rights. If you're stopped by a police officer or ICE agent, if you're in your home and an agent, and ICE knocks at the door, it's very important to know your rights and to exercise those constitutional rights that you have. Being cognizant that ICE cannot arrest you without a valid judicially signed warrant, And a warrant by ICE does not carry the same weight as a judicial warrant. Okay, it's an administrative warrant. It only allows them to enter public spaces, not private spaces. They can only enter your home, or with a valid judicial warrant that's signed by a judge. And you have the right to inspect any document. You don't need to open the door for them. And if they want you, you can request that they slide the documentation under the door and that you get an opportunity to inspect it. And if it's not a warrant, be very respectful and say, sir, with all due respect, I've looked at this document and this does not appear to be a judicial warrant. And I will not open the door. And so you have rights, and don't let them violate your rights. If you're in a situation where you have to exercise your rights for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your family, but don't resist. If they insist on arresting you, don't resist arrest. Don't try to run away. And exercise your right to request an attorney. And if you don't have an attorney, you can request a list of pro bono attorneys from Immigration Customs Enforcement. And if you have legal status, we're telling individuals who have legal status to carry documentation in their wallet of their legal status. You could just carry if you're, say, of course, permanent residents technically are required to carry their permanent resident card at all times, And so you need to put that permanent resident card right behind your driver's license, right? If you're here on a student visa, you might want to print a copy of your I-94, and a copy of your passport biographical page and visa page, and your, and stuff it in your wallet or put it in your car, somewhere you can access it in case you have to show your status, right? If you're here without status, you want to be able to carry some things with you, like the list of contacts that you need to get in touch with, if you're detained. You can request to make a call. You can request the ICE officer that you make a call to your loved ones or something like that. So, like I said, talk to lawyers, talk to experienced lawyers, and even if it's just a consultation, so that you can plan ahead and plan for any contingencies.
So this was really good information. So you're saying if you have permanent residence, if you have like a work permit card, or like if you have your I-94 visa, your F1 visa, make copies, carry them with you at all times.
Yeah, put it in your wallet so that in a situation where there's an ICE raid at work or something like that, or you have some documentation of your status with you. Or if you're caught in a situation where you have to show status just to get out of that situation, you have documentation. But if you don't have status, then also you have rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to ask an attorney. You have the right to refuse to sign any document presented to you without first consulting an attorney. So be informed of your rights and exercise those rights to protect yourself. Don't make it easy for them.
So Joyce asked, so the vice president said they would also consider revoking visas. How can a visa holder protect themselves?
Well, visas are temporary documents. And so, in many ways, the Department of State can revoke a visa. Usually they revoke for course, right? You just don't randomly revoke a visa, but you revoke for course, right? But of course, under this administration, we've seen, a lot of unusual, processes and things like that. So yes, it's possible that you could get your visa revoked. Typically, an officer will mention the basis for revocation, of the visa, but that's possible. Say, for example, if you're a visitor on a visitor visa and you're consistently traveling to the United States and you're spending more than 180 days in the United States, it may give an officer an impression that you're using a visitor visa to live in the United States, and that's good enough cause for that officer to revoke that visa, So they're valid legal reasons why an immigration officer could revoke a visa. So it just varies from one situation to another. I'd have to know the particulars of any given situation.
Thank you. Joanne?
I wanted to bring up our students, those on F1s, because it seems like schools are also starting to punish students who are protesting. There was that incident in Columbia University where students were protesting about Gaza and things like that. So I think if you have students who are part of your family or your community, it's good to be an activist, but this is not the time. This is not the time. They will lose their livelihood because of that. And if that's the hill they want to die on, that's fine. They'll lose them. Some of them are even losing their credentials, like their degrees. So I think you really have to tell your young people they need to choose the hill they want to die on wisely.
Good advice.
And
Go ahead, Barbara.
it just goes back to showing that no status is permanent, right? Like, and that, like right now, the Trump administration obviously has, kind of, gone back and pulled these very old laws, that they're using war powers and stuff that they're using against immigrants and the like. So, right now it's a time to really assess things before you get involved in certain things, and if you do something that they hate, or you're putting yourself at risk. Yeah. Oh, Chada, you're on mute.
Okay, Edu, I think you had. Thanks, Barbara. Edu.
Hey guys, thanks so much for this one. It's very useful information, and I applaud you for bringing people together on this. My question was, there was something you were talking about, Miss Joanne, and I think also Ichi mentioned it in the write up to this meeting. Could you guys share a little bit? Because I've never actually had experienced someone who was sent away and didn't have opportunity to talk to anyone or even sort out the things there. You were talking about a plan. Are there some things you can share based on what any of you have seen or experienced or heard, that a plan that someone can put together for an eventuality in which they encounter a situation in which they have to be taken out of the country and they're not allowed to prepare anything? They're just taken from where they are to outside.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, Barbara, go ahead, because this is your.
Yeah, I mean, it like I said, you start with it's very important to plan ahead, right? And to have trusted adults in your life, trusted individuals who can, attend to your affairs in the event that something like that happens to you. For example, consult with an attorney, have a power of attorney put together for you, in terms of what, giving rights to certain individual or certain individual in your life who can handle certain affairs for you. Keep your documents organized. Have documents organized in a place where a third party, a second party can find them. Should they need to, because you're in detention. It all comes down again to planning, and preparing yourself in the event of any of those things happening.
Yeah, I think Edu. So Barbara sent me some documents. I'll find a way to organize them and probably end up uploading them to Facebook, or I'll find a way to organize them, because they're documents, they're not links, but some of them include, knowing your rights, safety plan for youth and children, and being prepared. So I think we can put something together. Barbara, I'll try and kind of go through it to put it together to share with the folks. Joanne, you wanted to say something?
Thanks so much for that.
I was just going to say, I can also add on to that from like a family perspective, because I had one for myself. I've always had one for myself. Like when Angela was young, if this happens, this is who you contact. Like just having those conversations, especially when you have children, and also letting those people know that if I get sick and I'm in hospital, because it's not just immigration. If you're a single parent and you get sick and you're incapacitated, who is taking care of your children? Who is letting your family know that something has happened to you? How is your family getting here? Who do they need to talk to when they get here? We've had instances where somebody gets sick and then the mother gets here and she has nowhere to stay. So those kinds of things are all important for all of us to collectively think about and have plans for. So I will share with you, Ichi, and then you can share with the group from a Wezesha perspective.
I think there seems to be a need for that, right? Especially as the Kenyan community grows. And now I think a lot of us forget that our kids don't necessarily have the same associations as we do. You know, some of us have friends that and family members to whom we can lean, but they may not have that. And I think, Joan, you brought that up a couple of years ago when we lost some people, and you're like, okay, so is the child going to stay with people because
It was
they're
last
blood
year.
relatives, or would they stay with, you know, schoolmates with whom they're even closer, or coaches that they're closer with? So certainly a big topic. So
Yeah.
Francesca asked this, she said, did not know that, but don't they, the authorities, know everything about us from our driver's license? So Barbara, if the authorities look at the driver's license, can they tell citizen, non-citizen, undocumented, legal, illegal, F1, like, can they tell?
No, they can't, because those are different agencies, and a lot of times they don't speak to each other. So
So short answer, no.
yeah, because
Okay.
you have countries where, I mean, states where that illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants can obtain status. I mean, sorry, not status, but driver's licenses. You know, but there's no documentation of that individual, say in the immigration data system, because that person entered without inspection, right? So some information that they have, so the DMV may have your status if, like, you're an individual who applied for a driver's license with some kind of status. For example, individuals who are on F1, individuals who are on various work visas and the like, and that also depends with the state, right? Like I said, there's some states where individuals can apply for a driver's license, and they are undocumented, right? So so there are some states where that retain some of that information, because you have to present proof of immigration status, such as here in Georgia. You have to present some kind of proof of immigration status to obtain a driver's license. So in a situation like that, DMV may have some information about your status, because they need you to present some kind of proof of status to obtain a driver's license. But that doesn't necessarily apply in every context.
And I think it changes over time, right? So the more recent people, they had, their F1 visa. To get a driver's license, there were other things that you needed to do. Whereas in our time when we came, it was just go to the DMV and get a driver's license, right? But then to your point now, especially let's say over the last, since 9/11, I think things changed quite a bit, where you're even getting 2 years driver's license because you're on a F1 visa, right? So it varies by state, is not conclusively going to tell law enforcement whether or not you're a citizen, but that information may be contained in some states where they've collected that information in order to issue you a driver's license, I think is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, like here in Georgia, definitely, everybody who has a driver's license has to show some kind of proof of status, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's becoming also a requirement across the board for, what is it called, Real ID.
Yeah.
Starting in May, everybody's going to have, like, they won't stop you from driving or anything, but if you're traveling by air or whatever, if you're required to show the ID, it's going to be that Real ID, and you have to get that Real ID, you have to prove your status.
Got it. Florence.
I was going to add my own experience when I moved to Georgia and I got my driver's license. I went to open a bank account, and just because my expiration date of my license and my birthday did not match, I was asked the question, are you an American citizen? But that time I wasn't, I was a resident. So that's one way that they knew that.
Okay. Now you're opening another wave of questions that is suddenly coming to my mind, right?
I'm sorry.
No, not in a bad way, because and maybe we can save this for the next time, but there's a lot of rights that you have, rights and privileges that you have because you're documented versus not having, from driver's license, from opening bank accounts, from getting loans, buying a house. I know the answer to this question because Barbara has said it like 17 times. When you lie in those documents and you say you are who you're not, what are the implications of that when eventually you try to transition from one status to another? So for example, I come in legally, I'm a F1 visa, and I lie in my work application that I'm a US citizen. I lie in my, loan application that I'm a US citizen. What are the implications of that when I eventually get to the point where I'm trying to do a change of status?
That's problematic, because lying that you're a US citizen is considered a serious offense, in the immigration context. And so, of course, the immigration officer would have to find proof that you misrepresented that you're a U.S. citizen, right? But that would have serious immigration repercussions, including denial of an application, for misrepresenting U.S. citizenship. It's considered a severe offense.
Got it. Suzy, any tips for families inviting their loved ones on how to prepare to get a visitor's visa to the US from Kenya? Nowadays, it's almost impossible for Kenyans to get a visitor's visa. Most people are being denied.
Visas right now at the consulates are challenging, and visitor visas generally, because you have to meet certain criteria to qualify for a visitor visa. You have to show non-immigrant intent. You have to show strong ties to your country of nationality that proves to the immigration officer or consulate officer that you have the intent to return to your home country. So you have to show strong ties, property ownership, business, employment, and the like. And it's the most common visa that's requested for the consulate, and also the most common visa that's denied, at the consulates. I think part of the visa process is really to be extremely prepared and to present proper documentation. I always encourage clients, of course, if this individual is in Kenya, they're probably not in a position to get legal advice, right? But individuals who are here, who are applying for, relatives to come visit them, a mom to come, see the new baby and things like that. A lot of times, we'll be very thorough in terms of the kind of documentation that needs to be presented at the consulate. A lot of times you will, also keep in mind that ultimately the decision to grant or deny a visa at the consulate is in the sole discretion of the consulate officer. So sometimes you may have the right documentation, but you just got the wrong officer, and he just decides, I'm not going to grant you that. And so, yeah. And we're going to see, given the ongoing current, immigration environment, we're also going to see increases in denial. As I don't know if most of you are aware, but earlier in the Trump administration, second Trump administration, he issued an executive order, basically asking consulates out there to vet the security processes and everything. We expect a travel ban to be coming, and so we also, probably by the end of March, they'll be announcing a travel ban. Last weekend, there was speculation that the travel ban includes 40 countries. The list of possible countries that are going to be banned is 40 or 40 plus countries. We also expect an increased vetting at the consulates for in the visa process. Prior they had what they call the visa waiver the Dropbox processing of visas, where individuals who had a visa that expired 48 months or less and were going to apply for visas at the same time did not have to go for consulate interviews. And one of the other measures that the Trump administration took recently was to basically reduce the amount of time, now limit that time to 12 months. You can only go for Dropbox processing if your visa expired 12 months or less and you're seeking renewal under the same category. So we expect more people to get called in for visa, in-person appointments. We expect that, in-person appointments are going to become more difficult to get because of backlog at the consulates. And also we expect increased vetting, the consular security vetting and all kinds of vetting going on at the consulate. And in that, increase in denials in visa process, in visa applications.
Thank you. That was really, really thorough. All right. It is close to 10 o'clock. We've taken 2 hours of Barbara's time. The girls are waiting for their pizza, Florence, I know, has just flown back from Kenya. Yeah, Florence, no issues coming in, no issues at the border. Joanne, so we'll wrap up with final words, and I'll start with Florence, then Joanne, then Barbara. So what are your final words or final thoughts?
My final thoughts is that to avoid buying into the fear mongering, go to the source, like Barbara said, go to the source of information and avoid being scared up, avoid the fear mongering going around, because that's a lot going on. When talking to your kids, the best time to talk to your kid is in the car, in my opinion. That way you're not looking at them. If you are used to yelling and shouting at them, they would feel very confronted if you're eyeing them and telling, let's talk. Have that conversation in the car when you're concentrating on the car, but have your ear on the kids and ask curious questions. See what is in their heart. And if they start dwelling on negative things, first ask them, what is the positive thing about your day? Or have ways to open conversation and have ways of having a conversation that is not fear-inducing or raising anxiety in your household, and stay informed.
Thank you, Florence. Joanne?
I'll just piggyback on what Florence said. Always ask yourself, is this truth and fact? In everything and anything. Is this truth and fact? When you receive those WhatsApp messages, before you jump on that bandwagon and just start believing it, if you see those Instagram things or TikTok, wherever it is you're getting information, ask yourself, is this truth and fact? If you're not sure, do your due diligence. Barbara gave us resources of who to follow in terms of immigration to find out whether things are true or not. Do that. For me, what I also do is I look for trusted news sources that are not giving news in a way, like in a clickbait way. It's like truth, fact, you need to know what you need to know and you keep it moving. So you're not being, the news is not dysregulating your nervous system. So for all of us as adults, I would highly recommend to start implementing practices that keep your nervous system regulated. Because if you're going to talk to your kids, if you're going to be in these spaces where you have to operate from truth and fact, you cannot have a dysregulated nervous system. And if you don't know what that means, I'll give Ichi some resources so that he can share with us, so that we can be grounded in the home, so that we are better parents and better companions and better spouses, better whoever it is you're interacting with experiences you in a way that is not unkind, maybe. I don't know what the word is, but that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would add to what Joanne said by just saying that information is power. So get out there and find find accurate sources of information, and just I know it seems overwhelming, it seems daunting, but we will all get through this, and we'll all be here in 4 years, and this too shall pass, like everything in life. Just prepare, be positive, remain hopeful, and keep in mind that a lot of these executive orders are being challenged in court, and and hopefully the judiciary will stand up against the bullying, and the challenges to the Constitution, and a lot of this will pass. And and also there's also the fact that immigrants are contributed positively to this country, and the repercussions of all these measures are going to be seen soon. We have states right now trying to pass their own immigration laws, which is not allowed, of course, but it just shows how even the states themselves are anxious about this enforcement that's going on, and they realize it's going to impact their economies in a significant way. So keep that in mind, and self-care in this in this time is very important. Don't get bogged down in social media, watching every video on immigration.
Oh, we lost you. I think you went on mute. Oops.
Yeah, sorry about that. But don't get down in social media, bogged down in just, all that negative news and everything. Protect your minds and surround yourself and try to find your peace in all of this.
Excellent. I see some words here that I want to wrap this up with. Excellent forum, ladies and gents. Thank you. Thank you so much for this session. So insightful and so many points of information that I didn't even think of. Thank you all. Wezesha, again, is a forum where seeking empowerment through shared experiences, and that's always been the goal. So the collective shared experiences of you, Barbara, Florence, Joanne, and of everyone else who attended is what this forum is about. This is what I want everyone who leaves to do. I posted on the chat a form. It's a survey form, but basically, I want, given this information that you've heard, maybe some of these things apply to you. We want to come again on the 31st. We've tentatively set that date of the 31st. There may be more questions you have now that you have this information. There may be more concerns that you have now that you have this information. By submitting those questions, I'll see them, I'll give them to Barbara, Florence, and Joanne, and we can better prepare during the next session. But for me, thank you all so much. It's been great. This has been very informative, and I hope it's been informative for all of you. So have a good night. Happy Friday. And what did you say? You said, Barbara, I don't want to be political here, but you said just 4 more years, eh? Just
We'll make it. We'll all make it. We'll
all make it through
this too shall pass. This
too shall pass.
This too shall pass. Go learn a line dance like all the other Black people.
Yes. Yeah, and stay away from social media.
Stay away from social. Stay away from. And I think most importantly, Barbara, they are pathways.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, sorry, I want to say bye, but they are pathways. The distress and the anxiety of thinking there's nothing you can do does not exist, because they are pathways for you and for your loved ones. Or for your loved ones. So let's explore those pathways, and let's not be scared of those pathways. So, Santeni, have a good night. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. A wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.
Bye.